In 1912, the farming towns near Elkhorn, Wisconsin worked in silence after sunset. Families kept their barns locked and their lanterns burning until morning. Then livestock started dying in ways no one could explain. Strange prints appeared in the mud, spaced like steps from something tall and upright. Men began patrolling Bray Road after dark, rifles in hand, afraid of whatever studied them from the tree line. No one expected the horror waiting in those woods, or how close it would come to their doors. So before we continue, please make sure to leave a like and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. The year was 1912, and the spring thaw had only just started to soften the hard ground along Bray Road. I was 23 then, old enough to run my father's farm with my brother, but still young enough to feel uneasy when the nights went on too long. Our land sat on the edge of the woods, a few miles outside Elkhorn, Wisconsin. Most days were spent the same way, mending fences, hauling feed, and checking on the cattle before the light went. That year, though, the work felt different. Men spoke softer in town. Women pulled children close when dusk crept in. Something had started to move through the fields, and no one wanted to say its name out loud. It began with the animals. Across the county, livestock turned up, torn and scattered. A heifer found half buried in the ditch, ribs cracked open. Sheep with their throats opened so wide the doctor said no knife had done it. Horses refusing to go near certain pastures, snorting and backing away until their reins cut into their necks. Folks blamed wolves at first, or coyotes, or stray dogs gone mean, but the tracks never matched. Prints turned up in the mud near the bodies, wide and deep, pressed in pairs, the spacing fit for hind legs alone. Old men shook their heads and stayed quiet. Young ones forced short laughs and changed the subject. One cold evening in March, the town elders called a meeting in the back room of Jensen's store. Kerosene lamps smoked against the ceiling and wet boots lined the wall. I came in with my older brother Samuel and our neighbor, a broad-shouldered man named Ward who raised hogs south of us. The air in that room felt tight, and every breath seemed small. Farmers stood in clusters, hats in their hands, faces lined from years in the wind. No one spoke until Reverend Clark cleared his throat near the front and asked us all to sit. The sheriff laid out what little he knew. More livestock dead, signs of something large moving at night along Bray Road and out toward the marsh. A boy from a nearby farm had seen a shape cross the road ahead of his wagon the week before. He refused to give details. His father simply gripped his shoulder and said the boy did not lie. The sheriff did not raise his voice or pound his fist. He only said we could not afford to lose more animals, and if something out there was hunting them, we needed to face it instead of waiting behind locked doors. A plan formed in that cramped room. Men would go out in pairs or groups after sunset and ride the back roads, lanterns covered, rifles ready. Not a wild chase, just watch and follow any sound or sign. The elders decided on 3 nights of patrols. If nothing turned up, they would say it had moved on and we would go back to our chores and prayers. Samuel volunteered before I could stop him. When the sheriff asked who would join him along Bray Road, my hand went up. I heard myself speak before I had time to think it through. Part of me hoped the thing, whatever it was, would know we were ready and leave. On the first night, the patrols scattered across the countryside, wagons rolling out in 2s and 3s. Our group was small, Samuel, Ward, and me. We hitched our horses to the wagon just after sundown, packed a lantern, 2 rifles, and a shotgun, and headed for the long stretch of dirt that locals called Bray Road. The fields on either side still held patches of snow where the sun had not reached. The wagon wheels rolled over ruts frozen into the ground, each jolt climbing up through my boots and legs. Above us, the sky held a thin slice of moon and a row of hard white stars. The first miles passed in stiff silence. My brother drove, hands tight on the reins, jaw set. Ward sat beside me on the bench, shotgun resting between his knees, eyes on the ditch ahead. I tried to listen past the creak of the wagon. I picked out the small things first, the distant bark of a dog, the clatter of ice falling from a branch, the far-off whistle of a train heading toward Milwaukee. Normal sounds, familiar. Yet under them, there was an empty layer. The woods along the road gave nothing back. No crickets, no owls, just a steady, pressed-down quiet. We had gone perhaps 3 miles when we reached the old Miller place. That farm had stood empty for years after a fire took the barn and half the house. Only a few blackened beams and a stone foundation remained near the tree line. Samuel slowed the horses without a word. The air smelled damp, with a faint trace of smoke that never seemed to leave that spot even after so much time. Ward leaned forward and pointed to the soft ditch near the collapsed fence. Dark shapes marked the mud, still wet from the day's melt. Samuel drew the wagon to a stop and we climbed down. Our boots sank slightly into the soft earth. I raised the lantern and pulled the hood back just enough for a narrow line of light. The marks in the ditch were deep and clear. They were not the round prints of a horse or the cloven marks of cattle. They were long, with visible toes and blunt tips where claws had sunk in. They landed in pairs, left and right, spaced far apart, each step set down with heavy intent. The hair on my arms rose, and I let the light trace each impression without speaking. Ward knelt closer, his breath visible in the cold air. He placed his hand beside one of the prints. His fingers did not reach across it. He swore under his breath and pulled his hand back at once. Samuel moved the lantern, checking where the tracks led. They climbed out of the ditch toward the ruined Miller house, cut across the yard, and vanished near the edge of the trees where last year's leaves still lay in a thick layer. No broken branches above, no drag marks in the soil. Whatever had passed there had moved with speed and sure feet. "We should mark this for the sheriff," Samuel said quietly. His voice sounded flatter than usual, stripped of the easy calm he carried at home. "He'll want to see it in the morning." "We came out here so he wouldn't have to," Ward answered. "If that thing is still near, better we find it now than after it takes another calf or worse." His words sank in piece by piece. I had agreed to ride along because it seemed wrong to let others do the work while I stayed home. Standing there beside those prints, I felt the full weight of that choice. Turning back would have been simple. We could have blamed the dark, the cold, the rough road. No one would have called us cowards to our faces. Still, Samuel watched the trees with a steady stare, and I knew he would not turn around while there was a chance to end whatever had started to stalk our land. I took one last look at the prints and at the silent shell of the Miller place. It felt less like an empty farm and more like a doorway left open to something we did not understand. I tightened my coat against the chill and stepped back toward the wagon. We had set out to guard our fields and our families. That thought was the only thing that made my legs move. We climbed back onto the bench. Samuel kept the lantern hooded and set it on the floorboards near his boots. He flicked the reins and we went on at a slower roll. The road sloped toward a low marsh that spread on both sides behind a line of young willows. The thaw had freed a narrow channel, and water moved under a thin skin of ice that cracked in steady bursts. The sound carried in the empty air. I could not tell how far. I watched the roadside grasses bend in the light wind and tried to judge whether anything beyond them shifted on purpose. Ward broke the quiet first. "We make the culvert before midnight," he said. "If nothing turns up there, we turn back." He said it without argument, but it pinned our course in place. The culvert marked a narrow bridge where the road crossed the marsh drain. Cattle sometimes spooked there in summer for no clear reason. People blamed the echo, the smell, the dark water. Now it gave us a point to reach without drifting in circles. A mile beyond the Miller place, we passed a small clearing where woodcutters had left a pile of limbs for later. The horses tossed their heads and slowed. Samuel spoke low to them and patted the nearer one's neck. The animal's hide trembled in short bursts. I scanned the tree line. Something had been there recently. The damp ground held a scuffed area where a weight had shifted in place. I saw no prints like the ones at the Miller ditch, only churned soil and a patch of pressed down grass close to the fence. The fence beam on that side had fresh splinters along its top edge. Samuel kept the team steady while Ward climbed down and stepped toward the fence. He looked at the splinters, then pointed at the field beyond. A path cut through the winter stubble toward the marsh. No wagon had made it. Something had pushed through in a straight run. The stalks lay broken in a narrow line that widened where the field dipped. Ward waved us forward. We crossed the spot and turned our heads in the same direction without speaking. The path met the marsh and vanished into the reeds. The wind shifted and brought a new smell. It was not rot. It was a wet, raw odor I could not place at first. It had a hint of metal beneath it and a warm edge that did not match the cold air. The horses tossed again and tried to sidestep. Samuel halted and set the brake. "Keep them calm," he said. I climbed down and took the near horse's bridle while he eased off the bench with the rifle in hand. Ward moved toward the reeds, keeping to the firmest ground he could find. I raised the lantern hood a finger's width. The light cut across the reed tops and caught on something pale at the water's edge. Ward lifted his hand to hold us. He bent and reached into the reeds and pulled out a length of thick hair, matted and stuck to a broken stalk. He walked it back to the road. It was coarse, brown-gray, and long enough to twist. He did not twist it. He held it flat on his palm. Samuel touched it with the tip of the rifle barrel and stepped back. The smell grew stronger with it near us. "Fresh," Ward said. "How fresh?" I asked. "An hour, maybe less. Hard to tell in this cold." He looked past me to the reeds again. "It dragged through here in a hurry." I decided then that we would not turn back at the culvert. I kept that to myself. If I said it, I would have to argue for it, and an argument would burn through our attention. I wanted all of it on the ground and the trees. We moved on. The marsh narrowed into a ditch that ran beside the road. The culvert lay ahead, marked by two low walls of stone and a wooden guardrail. Something had broken the far end of the rail. The board hung on a single spike and swayed in the wind. Samuel brought the wagon to a stop before the bridge. Ward jumped down and stepped onto the stones. He pointed to a smear on the near wall. It was dark and tacky and held stray hairs. He sniffed it and did not comment. We crossed on foot, leading the team. The stones were slick, and the water below thudded against the culvert mouth. On the far side, the road bent sharply and climbed a rise. At the bend, the ditch widened into a mud patch where wheels often sank in spring. No tracks marred it tonight. The surface had a dull sheen that told me it had skimmed over with new ice after sunset. The stillness of that patch bothered me. If the thing had crossed here after we left town, it would have broken the gloss. It had either passed before dusk or not at all. We reached the rise and stopped again. The road ahead ran straight for a long stretch toward a line of pines that marked the parish boundary. Their tops met the stars and formed a black ridge. Beyond them lay Ward's turnoff in the lane that led to our farm. The thought pressed against me and I pushed it away. We were still on watch. The boundary could wait. Samuel lowered the rifle and glanced at the sky. "Half an hour," he said. We pushed to the pines, then looped back by the creek and cut across to the old schoolhouse. We'll pass 2 lanes and 3 farms. If there's sign there, we mark it and come back with more men. Ward nodded. He did not lift his eyes from the road edges. I checked the lantern fuel and the spare matches. My gloves stuck slightly to the metal cap where the heat had kissed it. I folded the hood back down and set the lantern beside my feet on the wagon floor. We went on again. A rumble rose behind us. I turned, expecting another patrol. A wagon came from the town side with 1 horse and 2 men on the bench. The horse's chest was flecked with frozen sweat. The man driving raised a hand. We drew to the side to let them pass, but they hauled up beside us instead. I recognized the driver, Howard from the East Flats. The second man was his hired hand, a quiet boy named Eli who did not look more than 16. Howard's voice came out strained. "You see anything?" "Tracks at the Miller ditch." "Hair in the reeds," Ward said. "You?" "Lost a sheep at dusk," Howard answered. "Found it near the creek with the chest open. No sign of wolves. Something stood over it. I saw the shadow from the lantern. It looked tall. I fired once and it moved into the brush without sound." He gripped the reins tighter. "We're making for the sheriff." "Tell him about the Miller place and the culvert," Samuel said. "He'll want men on both ends of the marsh." Howard nodded and clicked to the horse. The wagon moved off at a hard clip and vanished down the bend. I felt the urge to follow him. We had enough to take back. We had proof for anyone who doubted. Then I thought of the broken rail and the hair stuck to the reed. If we left, it would return to the same lanes. It would learn our routes and times and the slow turn of our wheels. We pressed on to the pines. As we neared the boundary, the scent we had caught at the reeds returned, stronger and higher in the nose. The horses balked, and Samuel reined them in with short, firm tugs. We listened. A low scrape sounded from the trees to the right of the road. Not a branch, not ice. It had a pattern, 2 short scratches, a pause, then a longer one. Ward moved to the right side of the wagon and stepped off the road into the needles. I raised the lantern hood just enough to mark his path. He found a young pine with gouges on its trunk at shoulder height. The marks were fresh, the edges pale, and sap already beating. They ran vertical and deep. I put my hand near them for scale and pulled back before touching. The marks were spaced wider than my hand. Ward measured the height by placing the shotgun butt at the ground and noting where the barrel met the lowest gouge. He said nothing. Samuel watched the tree line and kept the rifle on the gap between 2 trunks. A sound broke left of us, closer to the road. Dry needles compressed under weight. We held breaths without planning it. I turned the lantern off. The darkness came down in a single step. My pupils worked fast. Shapes settled into place. The road, the ditch, the fence farther off. The first row of trunks. Another step sounded, then silence. The wind had dropped. No reed moved. No branch creaked. Ward raised his left hand and held 2 fingers up, then closed them. He pointed to the ditch line and moved that way in a crouch. Samuel shifted to cover the left side. I kept my eyes on the gap ahead. A low exhale sounded from the ditch, not the horses, not one of us. It was steady and slow and ended with a wet edge. My throat tightened. I wanted the lantern back on, but I could not risk ruining our night sight. The exhale came again, closer. Samuel raised the rifle half an inch. I set my hand on the wagon's sideboard to steady myself. A shape rose from the ditch. I saw shoulders and a head above the road line, then the rest of the torso. It stood on the near bank, balanced and sure. The head had a long muzzle and upright ears. The eyes held the faint catch of starlight. The arms hung forward with weight in the hands. The chest was broad and carried thick fur. It did not sway. It did not test the air with its nose. It looked toward us without a pause or tilt. No one spoke. The horses shook but did not scream. Samuel's finger rested on the trigger guard and I could see his knuckles move with each pulse. Ward froze in the ditch and did not regain the road. He had stopped halfway down its slope. I thought of the boys who had been told to stay inside. I thought of the broken rail and the torn sheep. I drew a breath to steady my voice. I planned to say we would back away and keep eyes on it until we reached help. Before I could speak, the thing dropped back into the ditch and moved at a speed I could not track. It did not crash through the brush. It covered ground with low, firm steps that reached the fence line in 3 beats. We lost sight of it behind a stand of sumac. Silence returned. My heartbeat seemed loud in my ears. I loosened my grip on the sideboard and felt the rough grain under my palm, an ordinary detail that centered me for one moment. "We move," Samuel said, quiet and clear. "Slow, back to the bend, then we cut over to the schoolhouse path. No shots unless it closes fast. We keep it in front of us if we can. We do not run." Ward climbed back to the road and nodded. His jaw worked once. I reached for the lantern, thought better of it, and left it dark. We turned the team in a wide arc and started the slow roll back. The pines held their line. The ditch ran beside us, a strip of darker dark. I kept my eyes on the gap where it had stood. I did not see it again on that stretch. I felt it near us in the same way I had sensed a storm coming across the fields as a child. That thought ran through me and I let it pass. I would not carry guesses. I would carry only what I saw. We reached the bend again and took the turn toward the old schoolhouse road. This stretch of land felt different from the marsh. The ground climbed in a gradual slope and the trees cleared out into wide rolling pasture. Fences ran long and straight. No houses were visible from where we were yet, but I knew there were 2 farms past the school. The night air felt sharper here. The smell that had clung around the marsh faded. I tried to calm my breathing, but I could not shake the memory of the way it stood. The stillness of it, the steadiness. Nothing in the woods ever stood so fixed without fear or caution. We set a slow pace. The horses stayed uneasy but more manageable once the scent dropped off. Every so often, Ward looked over his shoulder and then looked ahead again without comment. He leaned forward slightly, tightened his coat, and shifted his weight as if ready to jump at any sudden noise. The schoolhouse sat near a small crossroads. The building had not been used for 2 years. A larger school had opened closer to town. The windows had been boarded to keep out vandals, and the bell had been removed. The last teacher to work there had moved away. People still used the grounds for picnic tables during summer fairs, but right now it stood as a black square against the faint horizon. We stopped beside the old gate. Samuel climbed down to check the latch post, out of habit more than necessity, and returned to the wagon. "We take the back lane past the creek," he said. "If we find sign there, then we end the night. No more open roads. We go home and bring 5 more men tomorrow." Ward agreed at once this time. His voice was steady again. "There's more than fear in this now," he said. "This thing isn't wandering lost. It knows the lines. It knows where the animals go. It's watching us the same way we're watching it." I wondered if it had followed the patrols on the previous nights. Maybe it wanted us to see the prints near the Miller place. Maybe it wanted to learn the way we tracked. I did not share that thought. I did not want to risk planting it into our heads before we had a plan. The back lane turned off the crossroads behind a stand of birches. The trees thinned within a few dozen steps and gave way to a flatter section where the creek cut through a hollow. The water there ran year-round. The horses stepped with caution down the slope. The wagon jostled sideways on the uneven ground, but we kept our balance. Samuel slowed them again as the road leveled beside the creek. The moon shifted behind a stray cloud. The darkness returned in full for a few seconds, and in that short time we heard a muffled noise behind us. Not from the ditch this time. It came from the direction of the road we had just traveled. It sounded like a weight landing from a height. Then another sound followed, lower, like a vibration through soil rather than air. The horses jerked hard. Ward set a hand on the backboard to keep himself upright. We held position without speaking. We listened. The creek made a steady, quiet sound against stones. The wind had died again. The night held its breath. I felt a tension in my chest, something pulsing through my ribs. I was afraid it was beside the road we had just come down and would cut us off from town. If that happened, the only direction left for escape would be the farms ahead, which meant it would reach them before any warning. We moved forward. Samuel kept the lantern dark. Ward grabbed his shotgun with both hands, his back against the sideboard of the wagon, eyes aimed at the lane behind us. I sat taller. My brother drove the horses forward one slow step at a time. The ground near the creek grew wetter. Mud clung to the wheels. The air smelled faintly of moss. I tried not to think about how little cover we had here if it wanted to rush us. We reached the far side of the hollow and climbed another slope. At the top, the land opened to the largest pasture in the area. This was the Reynolds spread. They raised dairy cows and a few workhorses. The house stood back from the road on a small incline. Lamps were still lit inside. They had a newborn this year. They likely took turns staying up to check the baby. A chill ran along my spine at the memory of the creature's silent movement. If it had come this way first, and if they had been tending to animals or stepping outside, they might not have even had time to close the door. We approached slowly. Samuel called out at a polite distance. "Reynolds," he said, "it's Samuel from the Sinclair place." Patrolling. The inner lamp dimmed slightly. Footsteps crossed the floor. The front door opened. Mr. Reynolds stood in the doorway with a shotgun. He wore a wool coat over night clothes. His boots were unlaced. His face looked lined from worry rather than age. His wife stood just behind him, holding the baby. She kept the infant swaddled close to her chest. "You boys see anything?" Reynolds asked. Samuel answered, "Yes, tracks near the Miller place, hair in the reeds by the marsh. We saw it in the ditch near the boundary pines." Reynolds swallowed and his grip tightened. His wife pulled back a step. The baby stirred and gave a small cry. "Did it come this way?" Reynolds asked. "I can't say," Samuel responded. "We don't know if it followed one road or circled the county. Keep your doors sealed. Keep the animals close to the barn. Don't step outside alone." Reynolds nodded and backed into the house. He tried to close the door gently, but the latch shook. Something about his fear added weight to the night in a way nothing else had. We were not out here chasing myths. We were out here trying to stop something that picked its own hours and targets without care to who it left alive or what it left behind. We set off again, heading toward the schoolhouse road's far exit, which would bring us near Ward's hog pens. This was the last stretch. The group morale was caught between determination and pressure. No one had said it, but each of us had chosen not to be the one who called for retreat first. Halfway to Ward's place, we found new marks. They were not tracks this time. They were claw gouges in the side of an old oak beside the road. They were higher than the ones in the pine, much higher. I stepped close and placed my hand at the highest point I could reach without going on my toes. The gouges extended far above that. I could not calculate how tall it was at that moment. No part of my mind wanted to. We turned toward Ward's farm. His hog houses stood at the end of a rutted lane next to a low hill. Before we reached the gate, the horses balked again. Samuel stopped them. Ward stared ahead. The hogs were screaming. Not normal squeals, not feeding time noise. It was panic. Sharp, short, frantic noise through the night. Ward jumped off and ran to the gate. Samuel and I followed with rifles raised. The smell we had noticed earlier returned with full force, stronger, wet, warm, metallic. Ward flung the gate open and bolted for the barn. We reached the edge of the pen and saw the hogs pressed against the far wall. Something moved near the trough. We raised our rifles and stepped closer. A single hog lay on its side, torn open. Fresh blood soaked straw and dirt. There were deep impressions around the kill spot. They were footprints shaped again, wide, hind leg placement. Whatever had done this had been here minutes ago, maybe seconds. Ward's face tightened with fury and fear combined. He grabbed my sleeve, voice steady but low. "It's coming for livestock first. When it learns we're hunting it, it'll come for houses. It'll come for the ones asleep." I looked across the pen and up toward the hill. The night did not feel empty anymore. It felt crowded with movement that was out of sight but close. It felt like something had taken full interest in us once we stepped onto that lane. "We get back to town now," Samuel said. "We gather everyone. This ends tomorrow night with every man able to carry a gun." We all agreed on the spot. That was not retreat. That was strategy. We were not 3 men anymore. We were the only warning line before it reached homes and bedrooms and helpless sleepers. We left the hog barn behind. Ward closed the gate, and we headed back toward the crossroads at a faster clip. I could not see it behind us, but I felt it. I felt the way the night had changed since we first left the store. Something had shifted. We had crossed from looking for evidence into being followed by the thing we came to find. As we pushed the wagon back toward the schoolhouse crossroads, the horses stayed tense and watched every shadow. We stopped speaking because it became clear that every noise carried far in that cold, open night. I tried to keep my attention fixed ahead, but part of my mind kept drifting back toward Ward's hog pen. The weight of what happened there had not settled yet. Nothing about that kill felt random or frantic. It was efficient, it was clean. It left exactly what it wanted us to see. Those prints were placed in the most open patch of straw, as if the creature wanted us to notice them. The last mile toward the crossroads felt twice as long. I could not stop replaying the moment we saw it in the ditch. It did not posture. It did not show teeth. It stood like something already certain of the ending. I felt pressure in my chest each time the memory returned. I knew that if we slipped or made any noise at the wrong moment, it would come out of the trees and run us down before we could even lift our rifles. When the schoolhouse came back into view, Samuel slowed the wagon and dismounted to lead the horses by hand the rest of the way up the road. He stayed close to their heads, whispering steady words to keep them from bolting before we reached the main road again. Ward and I moved on each side of the wagon, rifles ready. I kept glancing back between each step. The trees behind us looked still. The branches barely shifted. The air held a faint warmth that made no sense given the temperature. I could not tell if it was real or if my mind had decided to attach meaning to everything now. When we reached the crossroads, the air felt free again for a brief moment. The schoolhouse stood cold and quiet. The road toward Bray looked unchanged, yet none of us wanted to take that path back. The road toward town offered firmer ground and fewer places for anything to get close without us seeing it. We turned toward town. We made it half a mile down the road before the first new sign appeared. A length of fence had collapsed on the north side of the road. The beams were snapped, not rotted. The broken ends were pointed and sharp like they had been ripped, not weathered. Dirt around the break was disturbed in a straight, heavy line. Whatever knocked it down had leaned its weight into the wood. I remembered the claw marks in the oak. It was marking territory, or showing progress along a route only it understood. Nothing about these marks matched panic or random hunger. Everything about this felt like it was mapping its path step by step. Ward checked the break quickly without crossing it. He studied the wood, then walked back with a fixed stare. "It went this way toward town," he said. "Not toward the marsh, not toward the Miller farm, not toward the boundary pines, straight toward houses." We stepped back on the wagon. Samuel gave the horses their heads and kept pressure steady to push them to a faster pace. I kept the rifle angled toward the far side of the road and scanned for movement. The trees gave way to open fields with small barns and sheds scattered across them. Smoke rose from chimneys in faint wisps and made soft gray ribbons in the night. The thought of people asleep in those houses made my stomach coil. None of them had a reason to suspect tonight would be any different than the other nights of late winter. But there was something new in the air tonight, and the hairs on my arms still refused to lie flat. When we reached the point where Reynolds Lane connected, we saw a pair of lanterns bobbing in the distance along the main road. The glow came closer fast, and for the first time in hours, the sight of other people made my chest ease just enough to breathe normal again. 2 wagons approached from town side. Both were full of men. Rifles, axes, heavy coats. The sheriff led them. He raised his lantern when he saw us. "You 3 all right?" he called out. "We found it," Samuel answered, "and it's moving toward houses." We told them everything: the prints, the reeds, the ditch, the hog pen. No one interrupted. When we mentioned the way it stood, the sheriff tightened his jaw. When he heard it had come this close to town direction, he looked down the road past us and scanned the tree line very slowly. "We take the farms in pairs," he said. "Everyone stays grouped. No one splits off alone. Wake families, move children into central rooms. We force it away from the houses and toward the marsh if we can." This became the first real plan of the night. We all sensed it. We weren't wandering now. We weren't searching blindly. We had a direction, and so did it. We formed into groups of 3. The sheriff placed Samuel and I with him. Ward went with Howard and Eli. Each group took a farm cluster. Samuel and I followed the sheriff toward the first farm closest to town side. The others split onto 2 different lanes. The air had shifted again. The quiet was no longer the same quiet as earlier. It had a faint thrum in it, like everything around us was pulled tight and waiting to snap. Samuel knocked on the farmhouse door. The farmer inside recognized him and opened without question. The sheriff ordered them to wake the rest of the household and move them into the parlor. He told them not to fire unless the creature came directly through the doors or windows. We moved on to the next house. At the second farm, the yard dogs refused to leave the porch. They pressed their bodies against the wood and whimpered low in their throats. Their eyes tracked the shadows toward the barn. The sheriff froze, then motioned for us to circle wide around the barn before approaching it. The night around the barn felt thick. The animals inside were silent. That silence alone was wrong. Livestock always shifted at night. They always made some kind of noise. This was like something had sucked the natural sound out of that space. We reached the barn door. The sheriff nodded once. Samuel unlatched the door slowly while I raised the lantern shield just enough to let a thin line of light cut inside. What we saw made every muscle in my body turn rigid. Inside the barn, 5 cows stood shoulder to shoulder in the back corner. They faced the wall. They did not move. Their bodies shook in tiny tremors. Something had grazed one of their hides, a long, shallow scrape along the flank. Not deep enough to kill. Deep enough to bleed just a little. That scrape was recent. The horses in their stalls were wide-eyed and breathing fast. Their hooves had dug into the hay and dirt floor. Something had been in here only minutes before we arrived. The smell lingered, not the metallic one alone this time. Something warm, muskier, stronger. The sheriff did not step inside. He whispered instead, "It was here. It is not hunting livestock anymore." He looked at us then, and his expression told me what his voice didn't. It was hunting us. We backed away from the barn door and closed it without letting the latch click loudly. The sheriff stepped back into the open yard and scanned every direction. He wasn't looking for tracks anymore. He was looking for movement, real movement, and something in his posture told me he expected it to appear at any second. "We meet up with Ward's group," the sheriff whispered. We stay in sight lines of other men from now on. We headed back toward the crossroads at a steady pace. The road looked emptier than before. I checked the sky. The moon had gone behind another cloud. Without lantern light, most of the road was indistinguishable from the fields. Every sound now seemed to carry intent. Every shift in the grass sounded like slow steps. When we reached the crossroads again, we saw 2 lanterns flashing side to side in the distance, near the lane leading toward the marsh. That was Ward's signal. Urgent. 2 flashes, repeated. That meant stop immediately. The sheriff raised his rifle and stepped toward the fence line. Samuel and I took angles on each side. The wind gusted in one short push. I held still. The sheriff nodded and moved forward slowly, checking for anything moving along the ditch. The lanterns flashed again. No panic to them, just fast and controlled. When we finally met them halfway, Ward looked pale and furious at once. "It tried to circle behind us," he said. "We heard it break brush toward the creek and then double back toward the ridge. We went after it and it wasn't there anymore." Howard looked shaken. Eli stared at the ground with his jaw locked. Ward pointed to the ridge near the creek that sloped up toward the pine boundary. "It's thinking ahead. It's not just reacting. It's testing distance and direction every time we move." I hated knowing that assessment felt true. The sheriff turned to all of us. "We change tactics again. We push it into one direction. We don't let it work these angles. We hurt it whether it likes it or not." He outlined a fast plan. Ward's group would take the ridge side. We would take the roadside. The sheriff pointed toward the lane leading to the Miller farm ruins. "We push it back there. That place has the least number of farmhouses near it. If it tries to hold ground, we force it into those woods. I don't want it anywhere near town or the creek cluster." We agreed and moved fast. We spread in a line across the road heading north in the direction of the Miller ruins. I felt the pressure building with each step. The night was no longer quiet. It was loaded. Something inside that dark stretch ahead of us felt alive and alert. We kept rifles ready, lanterns half shielded. Our boots crunched the thin frost. The woods approached again. They looked darker now. The stars seemed further away. When we reached the turn toward the Miller place, the air shifted again. The sheriff raised his hand and everyone froze. He pointed at the ground. Fresh prints, same as before, deep, hind leg spacing, but angled in a different direction. These prints headed toward the burnt foundation of the Miller house. Ward whispered, "It's waiting. It wants cover. It wants thick timber and stone between us." The sheriff nodded once. "Then that's where we flush it." We followed the prints without speaking. We approached the old stone foundation. The ground dipped slightly. The ruined beams cast long shadows. Frost gathered along the jagged edges. The lantern light showed a wide patch of flattened grass near the corner of the stone. Something had sat there, not laid, sat, watching the road, watching the Miller ditch, watching everything moving through this stretch. My pulse hammered behind my eyes. The sheriff motioned half of us to swing right and half left. We were closing a noose on the ruins. The sheriff gave a low whistle, sharp and short. Everyone held. We stood in a semicircle around the foundation, rifles aimed inward. Then something shifted behind the stone wall. The sound was controlled, not startled, not fleeing, controlled, like it had chosen that exact moment. The sheriff aimed and spoke just loud enough for all of us to hear. "Come up slow. If it runs, we drive it toward the marsh. Do not fire unless you are in direct danger." We stepped toward the stone. Ward took the far left angle. Howard and Eli took the far right. Samuel and I stayed near the sheriff in the center. The ground under my boots started to feel soft again, like the earth couldn't hold weight well here anymore. The thing rose up behind the wall. This time there was no mistake in the height. It stood fully upright, and for the first time we saw the whole shape in one clear view. Broad shoulders, thick fur along the torso, hands that hung low and powerful, leg stands set wide and balanced, a long wolf-headed face with ears pointed up and forward. And the eyes. Those eyes glowed without reflection from any lantern. It made no warning sound, no growl, no breath-labored posture. It simply watched us. I felt my knees weaken. I felt my brother's hand tighten on my shoulder. I heard Ward draw in a breath through clenched teeth. None of us fired. The sheriff held his rifle steady and spoke directly to it. "You're leaving here tonight, one way or another." The creature tilted its head slightly, not confused, not curious, but assessing the sheriff's voice. Then it stepped forward, straight forward, toward us, not rushing, not attacking, walking, as if this moment was inevitable, as if it had been steering us here the entire night, as if every death, every mark, had been a single purpose: drive us to this confrontation on ground it chose. The sheriff's voice dropped to the level of lowest command. "Back 5 steps. Keep rifles up." We stepped back. The creature matched each step forward with one of its own, 5 for 5. Then it stopped again. We held. The world felt like it had narrowed to that exact patch of frost-coated earth. The sheriff spoke again, voice steady. "It wants to judge us. Not run, not hide. He nodded once. We end it now. The sheriff raised his rifle to his shoulder, but he did not fire immediately. He looked at each of us and waited for even the smallest signal of hesitation. None of us gave it. Ward locked his jaw and kept his shotgun aimed at the center mass. Howard gripped his rifle so tight his knuckles had gone bone white. Eli stood perfectly still, shaking only from breath but not from retreat. Samuel stood steady beside me, his body lined with the same tension that now held every muscle in my own. The creature stepped closer, narrowing the distance between us by 2 long strides. Its feet pressed clean into the soft ground. I watched the weight push soil down around each print. The earth groaned under that pressure. The eyes on its wolfed face held no flicker of fear, no flash of confusion. It had chosen this confrontation, not us. It wanted this moment to happen on this exact ground at this exact time. The sheriff fired the first shot. The rifle bucked and the blast cut through the quiet. The shot struck the creature in the upper chest. The first shifted from impact. It jolted half a step back but did not fall. The wound opened, but there was no sound of pain. It stared at the sheriff with the same unwavering gaze. Ward fired next. His shotgun blast hit lower along the ribs. This time the creature staggered another half step, then set its weight more deeply. It bent its knees slightly. Its shoulders leaned forward at the smallest angle, preparing for a direct clash. We all fired in succession. My shot landed somewhere near its left shoulder. Samuel struck near the hip. Howard fired 3 rapid shots into the center of the torso. Eli fired low, trying to take the legs. The creature jerked from the barrage, but it did not collapse. Dark fluid sprayed in a mist across frost and soil. The smell of it burned my throat. It was not fully like blood. It had a heavier scent, a thicker quality. The creature lowered itself further as if it was preparing to leap. Its teeth were visible now, not bared in threat, but merely present as part of its natural expression. It took one slow breath, then another. The sheriff shouted, "Reload!" We worked fast. My fingers shook as I broke open the chamber. Samuel reloaded with clean efficiency even though his breath now came short and tight. Ward fumbled once, then secured his shells. Howard jammed rounds in so fast he nearly bent one. Eli struggled, his hands trembling too much to seat the cartridge clean. I took 2 steps toward him out of instinct, but before I reached him, the creature moved. It crossed the space between us in a burst of raw speed. The sound it made was short, heavy, and driven by pure exertion. Not rage, not frenzy. Purpose. The sheriff fired point blank into the head at that exact moment. The shot struck above the brow ridge. The creature's head snapped back and the forward charge stopped. The creature collapsed onto both knees, dropping its weight into the frozen ground. Its arms hung forward and its breath came in low, deep draws. Ward fired again into the center of the chest. Howard fired next, aiming high at the neck. The final rifle blast tore through its throat. Blood poured onto the ground in a wide pool. The creature didn't roar or fight. It sank lower until its chest touched the earth. Its arms slid outward in slow motion. Its legs folded beneath it. It exhaled one last time. The sound of that breath was not anger or pain. It was final. It was the end of whatever this thing had been doing out here. No one spoke. The air around us stayed still. The cold felt sharp again. My knees almost buckled as the tension left my body in one overwhelming rush. Samuel stepped forward and kept his rifle leveled at the creature's head. The sheriff did the same. Ward walked around its side and kept his shotgun trained on the torso. I approached slower. Every step felt like I was walking away from the night we had been stuck inside of, step by step. Its eyes were open still, but the glow was gone. They were just eyes now, empty. Blood seeped into the ground around us in slow, widening circles. The sheriff waited another minute in silence before lowering his rifle. He checked the creature with the barrel, pressing lightly against the head and shoulder. "Dead," he said, voice low. "It's dead." Ward dropped his shotgun to his side and backed away by a step. Howard let his rifle fall against his thigh. Eli started shaking again, his hands over his mouth, trying to force his breathing into something steady. We stood around that body for a long time. Not one of us dared to touch it. We only stared at it and tried to understand what we had killed. There was now no question left in any mind. This was no stray wolf or wild dog. This was something that walked like a man, stood like a man, planned like a man, but carried power beyond anything natural to our fields or forests. Samuel turned toward the sheriff. "We bury it here, deep." The sheriff nodded. "And we do not speak of this to anyone outside the men who stand here tonight." Ward agreed immediately. "If this story spreads, it will ruin every home and every night in this county. No child will sleep again, and no farmhand will take work within 20 miles. Howard's breath steadied. "We say wolves, coyotes. Some disease drove them mad." "No trophies," the sheriff said. "No rumors. Nothing leaving this ground." We dug through the rest of the night using spades and sacks to carry loose soil. The ground was half frozen. It took longer than it should have. Sweat poured down our backs despite the cold. By the time the first thin violet line of dawn rose along the horizon, the body was covered under 3 feet of earth. We packed it tight. We placed stones over the top as one final seal. When the last shovel of soil was thrown, we stood in silence. Each man looked to the others. There were no final words. There was only a shared understanding. We walked back to town in a slow column with rifles lowered and lanterns held low. The night ended not because the danger passed, but because the hours ran out and daylight forced us back into the world again. For weeks after, the county was quiet. Livestock deaths stopped. No new prints turned up in the mud or along the fences. Farmers spoke in softer tones again. Life returned to its usual rhythm. But anyone who had stood at that ruined farm foundation on that night walked with a new caution in every field and every shadow. We never told our families. We never described the true shape of that thing. We never admitted how close it had come to reaching homes and bedrooms. We only knew one truth that lived behind every quiet look we shared in town for years to come. Something walked those woods in 1912, and we were the men who stopped it.